Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to really getting to grips with complex stuff, pulling out the surprising bits and the essential insights. Today, we're digging into a really significant piece of history. It starts in South Africa, 1948. That's the year the National Party came in and formally kicked off apartheid. And this wasn't just, a policy. It was a system designed to completely reshape South African life around race. We're talking deep oppression, state violence, but also somehow sparking this incredible global movement for freedom. So our mission today is to really unpack that. We'll be looking at historical documents, scholarly work, personal stories, trying to trace this whole story of institutionalized racism, from where it began, how it worked, and eventually how it all came crashing down. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? How something meant to divide so utterly could end up inspiring such a powerful call for human rights worldwide.
It really is. And I think what's key here is realizing apartheid wasn't just some sudden madness in 1948. It was really the endpoint of centuries of policies and power plays building up. And by looking at the specific laws, the events, you can almost see it being constructed, piece by piece.
Yeah, that construction piece is crucial. And like you said, we need to go way back, long before 1948, to see those foundations. We're talking 17th century. 1652, the Dutch East India Company sets up in Cape Town.
Right.
And then for the next couple of centuries, you see this gradual European expansion, often violent, pushing against indigenous peoples. It wasn't just about land, was it? It was setting up a hierarchy from the very start.
Exactly. And then the British arrive in the 19th century, taking over the Cape Colony in 1806, pushing their control further. But the real accelerant, you could say, was the discovery of diamonds and gold later that century.
Yeah.
That just unleashed this flood of European settlers and created this huge mining economy that was completely dependent on, exploited African labor.
And that economic engine running on prejudice basically set the course. Then you have the Anglo-Boer War.
1899 to 1902.
British win, Boer republics absorbed. And by 1910, the Union of South Africa is formed. Self-governing, technically, but dominated by white settlers and already riddled with racial discrimination. It's kind of staggering how much was already in place before the word apartheid was even official policy. What does that tell us?
Well, it tells us that apartheid wasn't some aberration. It was the logical, if brutal, endpoint of 300 years of colonial practice.
Yeah.
It was about taking existing biases, economic exploitation, and hardening them into law. Systematically. I mean, even early in the 20th century, you had laws telling black people where they could live, where they could work. The Native Land Act of 1913 is a stark example. It basically restricted black land ownership to just 7% of the whole country.
7%.
7%. So it wasn't sudden. It was this gradual, deliberate tightening of control.
And then 1948 happens. The National Party wins power. And that gradual tightening becomes, a stranglehold. Because this wasn't subtle anymore, was it? Their whole platform was maintaining white supremacy, protecting white privilege.
Yeah.
Explicitly.
Absolutely explicit. Their ideology was brutally simple. Total racial separation, white domination. Full stop. And the first thing they did was classify everyone, legally, into 4 boxes. White, black, colored meaning mixed race, and Indian.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Yeah.
And that classification wasn't just paperwork. It determined everything. Your rights, your privileges, where you stood in the hierarchy. Whites at the top, naturally. Black South Africans right at the bottom.
And the laws just flowed from that classification, didn't they? Affecting every part of life.
Exactly. The Population Registration Act of 1950 made that classification mandatory. You were labeled.
Right.
Then the Group Areas Act, same year, dictated where each race could live, work, own property, literally ripping communities apart based on race.
And the education system.
The Bantu Education Act of 1953. Deeply insidious. It created a deliberately separate and inferior education system for black children. The aim was, quite literally, to limit their horizons, train them for subservience.
It's chilling. It goes beyond just separating people. What was the deeper goal there strategically? Was it about destroying any sense of a unified nation?
I think that's a huge part of it. It's about total control, codifying separation so deeply it becomes the bedrock of society. It dictates your home, your job, your kids' education, your future, and the homelands policy that Bantu stands that fits right in.
Explain those a bit more.
Well, the government line was, these are places for black ethnic groups to develop their own culture, have self-government. Nice idea on paper, maybe.
But the reality?
The reality was a cynical legal trick. By creating these supposed homelands, they could strip millions of black South Africans of their actual South African citizenship.
Making them foreigners in their own country.
Precisely. confined to these often impoverished, fragmented territories. While white South Africa kept control of the cities, the resources, the wealth, it was about disenfranchisement on a mass scale.
And this whole edifice, it was held up by force, wasn't it? Laws, yes, but backed by violence.
Absolutely. Police violence, military force, the state security apparatus was there specifically to crush any opposition. Thousands were arrested over the years. Torture was common. People were killed for resisting.
It's terrifying to think about. How did they keep such tight control for so long, especially when so many people hated the system? What kept it going beyond just the police batons?
Well, the sheer scale of the state violence was obviously key. But it was also the way the legal system was weaponized. When every tiny aspect of your life is controlled by discriminatory laws, and breaking them means facing brutal consequences, it creates this pervasive fear. Add to that strict censorship, banning opposition groups, controlling the media. It just made organizing any kind of resistance incredibly dangerous and difficult. Dissent was crushed, quickly and brutally.
Yet somehow people did resist. That spirit just wouldn't die.
No, it wouldn't.
You had organizations like the African National Congress, the ANC. They'd been around since 1912, fighting for black rights long before apartheid was the official term.
And others too, like the Pan-Africanist Congress, the PEC, and later the Black Consciousness Movement. Incredibly important.
And the resistance took so many forms.
It really did. And it had to evolve, constantly adapting to the state's crackdowns. You had peaceful protests, boycotts, strikes, huge ones sometimes. But when those were met with violence, some groups felt they had no choice but to turn to armed struggle, like Umkhonto weSizwe, the ANC's armed wing, Spear of the Nation, a tough decision born out of sheer desperation.
And the state's answer was always more repression, mass arrests, torture, killings. Sharpeville, 1960. That name still echoes, doesn't it?
It does, March 21st. A peaceful protest against the hated pass laws, the internal passports black South Africans had to carry. Police just opened fire, killed 69 people, wounded hundreds more.
Unarmed protesters.
Unarmed, it was a massacre. And it really did shock the world. People outside South Africa started to see the true brutality of the regime. International pressure definitely ramped up after Sharpeville.
But inside South Africa, the immediate result was harsher crackdown, right?
Oh, yes. The ANC and PAC were banned outright. Leaders arrested or forced into exile if they could escape. And that's when Nelson Mandela really becomes central to the story. An ANC leader already prominent.
Arrested in 62.
Sentenced to life in prison in 1964, along with other leaders after the Rivonia trial. And he spends the next 27 years behind bars. But instead of being forgotten, he becomes this powerful global symbol of the entire struggle.
It's just incredible. The resilience needed not just to fight, but to imagine building something new afterwards.
It really is. Mandela's story is obviously iconic, but looking through the testimonies and histories, what also stands out are the sort of smaller, everyday acts of defiance. Communities secretly teaching kids after Bantu education came in. People finding clever ways around the pass laws.
Keeping the spirit alive day by day.
Exactly. It shows this constant, quiet resistance alongside the big protest and the armed struggle. It was wearing the system down from within, too. But Mandela's imprisonment, that focused the world's attention like almost nothing else.
And that global attention really mattered, didn't it? The international community started to get involved more forcefully.
Hugely important. You had the UN imposing economic sanctions, countries, organizations boycotting South African products, sports teams.
Cultural boycott, too.
Yes. The anti-apartheid movement became this massive global cause. People marching, protesting, demanding action in London, New York, everywhere.
That must have put immense pressure on the regime.
Enormous pressure, especially through the 1980s. Economically, politically, combine that global isolation with the growing resistance inside South Africa. The townships were often ungovernable by then. And the government, even while cracking down harder, had to start realizing this just wasn't sustainable.
Morally bankrupt, obviously, but also just practically falling apart.
Right. Diplomatically isolated, economically squeezed, that external pressure was a critical factor in forcing their hand.
And then, the big shift. 1989, F.W. de Klerk becomes president, starts talking reform.
A surprise to many.
And then 1990. February, the announcement that stunned the world, ANC unbanned, other groups too, and crucially, Nelson Mandela, to be released.
I remember watching that. It felt like history holding its breath.
Absolutely. So that global pressure, the sanctions, the boycotts, how much did that directly force de Klerk's hand, do you think? Was it the main driver?
It was a massive driver. You can't discount the internal resistance, obviously, that made the country increasingly unstable. But the economic pain from sanctions, the political isolation, it created a crisis for the white regime. De Klerk's moves weren't really about a sudden moral awakening, I don't think. They were pragmatic, a calculation that the system was doomed anyway, and negotiation was the only way to avoid an all-out civil war and total collapse. It was, perhaps, a strategic retreat forced by that combined internal and external pressure.
And Mandela walks free, a global icon.
Yeah.
But instead of vengeance, he talks reconciliation, starts negotiating the future.
Incredible statesmanship. And those negotiations were incredibly fraught.
I bet.
You had the government, the ANC, Inkatha, other groups, deep mistrust, and violence was still happening. Extremists on both sides trying to derail the process.
Saved Idris time.
Very. But somehow they hammered out an agreement for a transition to democracy, which is just remarkable given the decades of bitterness.
Leading to 1994, the first democratic elections. Everyone votes.
A profoundly moving moment for South Africa and the world, watching those long queues of people, black and white, waiting patiently to cast their first vote.
ANC wins big. Nelson Mandela becomes president. An unbelievable moment.
Truly.
But as you said, ending apartheid's laws was just the first step. The damage was so deep. Poverty, inequality, the psychological scars. How do you even begin to rebuild after that?
That was the monumental task. And one of the most distinctive things they did was set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC.
Right, headed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Yes. And the idea wasn't primarily punishment like the Nuremberg trials say. It was about uncovering the truth of what happened during apartheid. Victims could tell their stories, have their pain acknowledged. Perpetrators could apply for amnesty if they fully confessed their politically motivated crimes.
Controversial, though. Some felt it let people off too lightly.
Definitely controversial. Amnesty was hard for many victims to accept. But the thinking was that getting the truth out, acknowledging the past, was essential for national healing, for building some kind of shared future. It was an unprecedented experiment in restorative justice on a national scale.
And that process, that legacy, it's still playing out today, isn't it?
Absolutely. South Africa still faces huge challenges. Inequality is stark, often still along racial lines. Poverty, unemployment. The ghosts of apartheid are long.
But there's been progress, too.
Undeniably. It's a vibrant democracy. Whatever its problems, there's been significant change. But the struggle to overcome that deeply embedded legacy is ongoing. It wasn't just laws. It was an entire social and economic structure built on injustice.
So when we look back at this whole story, what are the biggest lessons, do you think? Things that resonate today?
Well, the obvious one is the sheer evil of racism, especially when it's baked into the state itself, but also the importance of resistance, of people refusing to accept injustice even against overwhelming power. And the power of solidarity, that international pressure, really did make a difference. It shows that what happens in one country can and should concern us all.
Maybe also that change, even fundamental change, is actually possible. It might seem impossible at the time.
Exactly. The end of apartheid felt impossible for decades. Its collapse reminds us that even the most entrenched systems of oppression are not permanent. They can be challenged and they can be dismantled. But it takes courage, persistence, and collective action.
It really underscores that the fight against injustice is often a long game, isn't it? Spanning generations sometimes. And reconciliation is maybe even harder work than revolution.
That's a really profound point. Building that just and equitable society after the structures of oppression fall, that's the ongoing work. And South Africa's story, with all its complexities and continuing struggles, shows us just how hard but how necessary that work is.
Okay, so we've tracked apartheid from its deep colonial origins through its brutal implementation, the incredible resistance, and finally, the birth of a new South Africa. The lessons about human dignity, fighting back, the impact the world can have when it unites, they're powerful. And it really makes you think. Apartheid showed that these massive systems of division can be taken down. So maybe the question for us listening now is, what are the less obvious systems of inequality, the subtle injustices that we might need to face in our own communities today? And what can we learn from South Africa's incredibly difficult but ultimately hopeful struggle? Something to chew on.